Welcome to Real Mammoth, the podcast where we talk about real stories and real estate in Mammoth Lakes and the Eastern Sierra. I'm your host, Joseph Bogorad. I'm here today with my partner in business and life, Grace Aleman. Thank you so much for being here. And today we are going to talk about the short-term rental moratorium here in Mammoth Lakes because it's such a hot topic. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely a hot topic in the real estate community. Property owners, property managers, and also locals are very invested in this moratorium.
Yeah. So why did this even happen?
So when the moratorium first went into place in October, the town council cited our housing crisis here in Mammoth Lakes for being the main reason for initiating this moratorium.
So there's a housing crisis?
Yeah, it's really tough to find long-term housing, particularly long-term affordable rentals in Mammoth Lakes. And for that reason, we have some people who end up living out of their cars. I think at one of the meetings, I heard we have at least 50 people living in their cars who work in Mammoth right now.
Yeah, that's not nothing. And I think we've both experienced this struggle. It is extremely hard to find housing here. Mammoth Lakes, June Lake, and Lee Vining, the whole Eastern Sierra. It's pretty tough. I remember when I first got the job at June Mountain as a lift operator, I was calling around everybody, and people were helpful, but in the end, they couldn't just say, oh yeah, here, just, here's a lease ready to go, and here's a space for you ready to move in. And that was the hardest thing. I called Lee Vining, I called people in June Lake, and really nothing. And so I just took the whim to come here and hopefully find housing. The plan was to live in a van with one of my friends, and turned out to be a really bad idea for us real quick, mostly because it was just freezing cold. It's a funny thing. My water bottle would freeze every night, so I would have to sleep with it in my sleeping bag. And we tried everything, double sleeping bags, and we tried duct taping the seams, and it was nothing really worked. It was always cold.
Yeah.
Have you had a similar story?
Sort of. When I first came out here, I had housing through the Mammoth Lake Committee since I was working for them. But then when I did decide I wanted to stay, it was a bit of a, shoot, where do I live now? I don't have this housing. And, it took asking around. I first just sort of moved in with a friend, but it was pretty tight house, not the best, spot, and, found eventually another room. So definitely, bounced around, and whenever one lease ended or I moved for whatever reason, it would take truly months of telling everyone I knew, hey, I'm looking for a rental. Let me know if you have anything, before I would find something that was a true long-term lease.
Right. And weren't you working, was this the right order? You were working at the pack station, and then when you left, you didn't know where to stay?
Yeah, I worked at the pack station in Mammoth for one summer, and then lived at the pack station. And then when that ended, I basically just told everyone I knew I was looking for housing. And I think I left the pack station in August and was couch surfing, stayed at a friend's house that they happened to have. And then it took until, I think, December for me to move in and find my own lease instead of couch surfing.
Yeah, and that kind of intermediary time, it really took a town, because you were just so lucky enough to, because of your experience, and you were an after school teacher for a little bit, and so you're close to some of the families in June Lake and Lee Vining. One family just so happened to have a cabin that they were happy to loan you for about 3 months, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I got super lucky. I easily could have been living out of my car if that family hadn't let me stay in their cabin.
Yeah, and that's just the thing here. It's everybody wants to be here, including people from LA, all around the world, and people who want to work here and live here. And so people try to find any way to live here, and it's extremely hard. And I definitely have a soft spot for people like our friends, and there are lots of people who really need a place. I know this family who now found a place in Bishop. But yeah, this whole family just took a room in someone's house who was generous enough to offer their space. But of course, everything like that is pretty temporary. So there is like a emotional spot for a lot of people here, especially when it comes to housing, right?
Yeah, I think anyone who has lived in Mammoth for longer than a few months, can either has their own experience or knows someone who's really struggled to find housing. So it's very real. And, the town council wanting to take action on the housing crisis is great. We definitely need, more housing for locals. Whether this moratorium has created any new housing has yet to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Right. So this is a good leeway. So let's get right into that's the reason why. And, again, it's kind of a personal thing for a lot of people. Obviously, it sucks to see your friends go, and it sucks to pack everything in your car. So what is the moratorium about? How did it start, and where are we now?
So the moratorium started in October, and this was something that the town council initiated, and they did it with a 4-1 vote at a town council meeting. And so it started in October first for 45 days, and then it later got extended so currently it's in place till the end of May. And the moratorium is basically a temporary pause on the issuance of new short-term rental permits. Also, you might also hear them referred to as TOT permits, transient occupancy tax permits. So what this means is right now, anyone who was already operating a short-term rental legally, they're good to go. But if you had plans to get a permit and you currently don't have one, you're out of luck.
Right. So there's a few important things there. Yeah. So it started in October 2023, and it was supposed to be 45 days, but everyone knew that they were going to extend it. And so obviously they extended it to May 31st, 2024. And during this time, we're supposed to kind of figure out ways how to solve this housing crisis. And again, and you made another great point there, is that it doesn't affect anyone who's currently legally nightly renting at the moment. It does affect people who would want to buy. The property is transferred to a new owner, and then that new owner cannot get a new short-term rental permit.
Yeah, that's a good point. It also affects anyone who's currently operating legally but was hoping to maybe change property managers, or maybe they were the one managing the rental and now they want a property manager. So basically there's no changes to however you are operating your short-term rental if you already were.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because it kind of affected a lot of people, and I felt like it seemed like a lot of people were kind of blindsided too, because there are people who've been doing renovations, so they don't have their permit, and they were planning to nightly rent and be here when it's not rented, and so those people are kind of out of luck right now.
Yeah, and we even heard from some property managers at the town council meetings who had been in the process of onboarding potential new properties, and then that process just had to stop.
Yeah, that's interesting. There was a 60-day grace period if you were in escrow before the vote. As of now, it's probably over. Everyone who could have gotten a permit already got one. There was a little rush to the market. I think over 100 permits.
I think so. Yeah, something like that. So
that was interesting. And I knew plenty of locals who owned a place here, who live here full time, and they just got one because they wanted, just in case they leave for Christmas, and they want to nightly rent it for a week. So lots of interesting things there. So now that's kind of what is going on, and some of the, not the issues, but some of the that was just about the moratorium and kind of what's going on. So now, where are we now?
So throughout this moratorium, the town council, they did appoint what they're calling a short-term rental advisory committee, and this committee was appointed by the town council of real estate agents, property managers, and also just local community members, and I think also a mortgage lender. Their job was to come up with recommendations that would help our housing crisis. and make those recommendations to the town council for the town council to then take action on. So that committee has been meeting. They've had maybe 3-4 meetings, and their recommendations were pretty much finalized and ready to be presented, and they were presented at the last town council meeting, which was February 7th, this past Wednesday, because now we're recording on February 9th.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so it seems like, right, this appointed subcommittee, including some members of the town council were on there. There were a bunch of real estate professionals on there as well, right? There was a property manager, a lender, a real estate agent, and even some local members of the community, right? Full-time members?
Yeah, community members. I think also a business owner. I think like someone who owns a restaurant. So a lot of, local experts in various fields.
Right. Yeah, I think even someone from Eastern Sierra Community Housing was on there, right?
So, yeah.
Yeah. And huge asset to the committee, because that's something else that maybe we can touch on real quick. Mammoth Lakes Housing, now Eastern Sierra Community Housing, is a nonprofit that their mission is to put people into homes, right? Yeah, so shout out to them. It's a great organization. And thank you for what you do. And so now the committee was made. They had several meetings to make a whole list of recommendations. Do you have those in front of you?
Yeah. So the committee basically came up with 4 main recommendations for the town council. And the first recommendation was called the Certified Property Program. This is basically some enhanced guidelines for people getting short-term rental permits, and also increased fees. The new fee that's proposed is $250 annually, so this is a small increase from what is currently in place. Also, they want increased safety inspections. So really lots of good things just to make sure the town can hold, the owners accountable for these short-term rentals. If there's any, issues, they can contact the owners and, make sure the town is aware of, everything that's going on with these rentals.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So yeah, just more stringent inspections, higher fines, a higher fee. It seems like I kind of heard that this was what the town wanted, basically.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's much controversy on this first proposal. I think everyone's, pretty on board for making sure, any short-term rentals are safe, and that, I don't think, and that if people are not following the rules, that there will be increased fines and penalties. So, yeah, I don't think, many people have issues with this one.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It almost like slightly they increased the barrier to entry. Because in the past, it wasn't like the Wild West, but it was pretty simple to get a permit on a condo. And real quick, I'll just touch on, in 2015, Measure Z was passed, which banned nightly rentals on single-family homes. Most single-family homes. There are only a few neighborhoods where you can nightly rent a single-family home. As a general rule, you cannot. And nowadays, these houses typically will go for $2 million, $3 million plus. There's been one example where one house went for 1.3, but that's another story. And so kind of as a general rule, most condos are okay as long as the HOA allows it. So now the barrier to entry has increased. And another thing that was kind of interesting too on this first topic was that now they're going to double check that even your cleaners have a business license. Mm-hmm. I believe that's one, right?
That was one. And then one of the other kind of more stringent rules is everyone's required to have a 24-hour contact for if you have a short-term rental. And so the town has apparently had issues sometimes calling these numbers and no one ever answers. So now whoever is on that 24-hour contact needs to be registered with the town unless it's the owner and the owner is within 60 miles. And again, makes sense. If there's an emergency, they want to be able to make sure either the renter or the town can contact someone who can respond.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I would recommend if there is an emergency, like the house is on fire, I think first things first, I would call 911. If there's a flood, you know, if something's leaking profusely, probably call that 24-hour property manager. That would be important. And so now if you have somebody on that 24-hour contact, you're going to need to find someone licensed with the town, and the town has a whole list of those people.
Yes.
Yeah, so just visit the town website and you can find that list. And so moving on, so that's number 1, certified property program. Number 2 is
basically to create ongoing funding for housing. And so Mammoth does already have what they're calling their Housing Now program, which the town has been using to purchase market rate condos that they then sell back below market rate to locals. And a lot of this money has, come from TOT funds, just not really a dedicated housing fund source. And so they're looking at a way to have ongoing funding that can be either used for, down payment assistance, rental subsidy, or building new housing. And the suggestions that came from the committee were to either increase TOT up to a 2% increase. So we're at 14. So that would get us to 16. And in order for that to happen, it would need to go to a vote on the ballot. On a ballot. So that's not something just the town council alone can pass.
Mm-hmm. And I want to recheck real quick. So TOT is actually 13%, but there's a 1% T-bid on all businesses in the town of Mammoth Lakes. But yeah, so this kind of bump in taxes will get us to one of the highest transient occupancy tax places in all of California, it seems like. Not the highest, but pretty close.
Up there. Yeah. And so that some people did have concerns about Mammoth having such a high TOT that it might dissuade visitors from visiting. Other people didn't think, what's a big deal about a 2% increase? Is someone really going to notice that on their, reservation? So that is pretty much number 2, is to create a funding source. One other way they talked about, which I'm not as clear on, is instead of a TOT increase, it would be a tax on STR's gross receipts. And so I think that's on, the income people are bringing in.
Right. Yeah. So it sounded like that. So it's like you would add up all your revenue for the whole year, and then it could be an additional tax based on that number.
Yeah, but I think that one wouldn't apply to hotels, so that seemed to be contentious for some people. Like, why single out the people who have, STRs as opposed to just all transient lodging?
Mm-hmm. So summarize number 2, create a funding source for long-term housing, and the way to do so would be increase taxes, basically, which would go to a vote.
Pretty much. Mm-hmm. And then the third proposal has to do more with actually getting locals into housing. So spending that housing money that's been generated. And the 2 ways they've talked about is 1, a rental subsidy. So going to owners who have short-term rentals and saying, hey, if you rent long-term to a local, this could be 6 months, could be a year, we will pay you an additional amount of money on top of what the renter pays you. And then the other idea is a down payment assistance program. So this would only be available for people who are actually working in the community. It wouldn't be available to remote workers. And it would basically, be, I think, up to 20% down, maybe even more. Again, program's not fully fleshed out yet. It's more of an idea, but down payment assistance to help locals buy. And the good thing about this coming from town funds as opposed to federal grants is they would actually be able to give this money to people who are making up to 200% of our area median income. So that's more, those are the people who might qualify more to buy something, whereas a lot of the federal funds only go up to like 80% of the area median income.
Right, and that's a huge kind of hurdle for especially Eastern Sierra community housing, because if you make if you're making not much at all, you can apply for a lot of programs. But if you're making, maybe if you're a manager somewhere and you're kind of ranking up and you're doing a little better, then there's virtually zero programs for you. So it's in some situations it's even harder to find housing if you do have a decent job, or maybe you and your spouse have a decent job, because you're kind of right in this, they call it the missing middle, where you make too much money to have these to be in subsidized housing, or you don't make enough, and you don't make enough to qualify for a $300,000-$500,000 mortgage.
Exactly. So that's, one of the reasons for looking into a down payment assistance program that is coming from town's money as opposed to federal. And then the fourth idea, this is probably the most controversial topic that has been brought up throughout this whole process, and that is a potential splitting of our residential multifamily 2 zone. And so the idea here is the properties that are closer to what the town has called the ski portals, so condos by Canyon Lodge, Eagle Lodge, and the Village, those would get split into a new zone, basically an RMF resort or RMF3 zone. Name's not locked in place yet, but and those would be basically, that would be the town's way of saying these areas are very much geared for transient rentals, resort activities. And then the remaining RMF2 zone would be where the town aims some of these programs, like rental subsidies or down payment assistance programs. They haven't mentioned taking away like any of the, short-term rental or the ability to short-term rent in the remaining RMF2 zone. But this one's been a very heated topic. A lot of people, kind of on both sides of the fence. Some people don't want to be deemed resort. Some people don't want to be not called resort, even though they are still pretty close to, say, the Village or Eagle Lodge. But, the boundary just kind of missed them.
Yeah, and that is an interesting thing, is like the zoning, right? So right now, the town of Mammoth Lakes is zoned. We really need to show you a map, but basically, and kind of going back to the beginning, back to just the roots of the moratorium, there are technically 3 zones in Mammoth Lakes that are not affected by the moratorium. One is the Village, one is resorts, and one is called the Clearwater Specific Plan, which is just the Sierra Nevada Resort, but now it's called Outbound Mammoth, so that doesn't really count for most people. But the resort zone it's really hard to describe, but basically it's all the Snow Creeks, it's all the intra-west properties, and the Village is very specific. It's mainly just the Village. It doesn't go too far out. And so talking about rezoning, and so Grace mentioned residential multifamily 2, and that zone is in a lot of, I'm going to say random, but it wasn't random because there was a planning commission who, zoned the whole town, but it's in a lot of different areas in Mammoth is what I'm trying to say. And it's
where a lot of the condos fall that majority of people are short-term renting.
Right. Yeah. So there's going to be RMF2 in town. And when I say town, it's like kind of along Old Mammoth near the grocery stores. As soon as you get into Old Mammoth, it goes into a bunch of different zones. And then there's a bunch between Canyon and the Village, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the split that they're kind of talking about, is right by the Village and Canyon. Maybe these shouldn't be RMF2. Maybe they should be RMF3 or RMFR as resorts. And so if there was ever, or if there will ever be another whole rezoning, which will take probably years, right? Then that area, kind of what Grace mentioned as ski portals, will turn into a different zone. It did seem like this was they called this a low priority on this list of recommendations. And so it's kind of TBD on that. So if you do have a condo near Canyon, and if this, takes years and, this is one of the ideas that they go through with, then it seems like Canyon will be rezoned and anything by the village will be. Not everything, though, but most things.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It makes sense to want to call some of those condos that are, right by Canyon or right by Eagle, kind of reclassify them as a more resort designation. I just think it's interesting that the remaining RMF2 zone would basically stay the same. It doesn't sound like, at least at this time, that all of a sudden those condos, would no longer be able to nightly rent.
Yeah, that is interesting. And so who knows as far as value, as far as anything that's going to kind of prohibit nightly rentals, because these recommendations basically avoided anything that's going to cap nightly rentals, that's going to ban them. So these recommendations were made over quite a few meetings, and then they were kind of presented in this manner at the town council meeting on February 7th. And then what happened?
It was a pretty heated meeting. It seemed like only 4 of the 5 council members were there. So that's, for starters. And it seemed like 2 of the council members were ready to advise on these recommendations, tell the town staff, like, yes, move forward with this, or no, don't move forward with this. And 2 of the other council members it sort of seemed like they thought these recommendations weren't enough, and that they felt that caps absolutely needed to be included in the recommendations, as well as a 1-year wait. So our understanding of what happened at that meeting is basically that the certified property program is moving forward, that, town is going to start working on updating the municipal code. So that will come back at another town council meeting. But then town staff has also been instructed to look into caps and a 1-year wait. So those weren't recommendations that came from the committee. I think the committee was really looking at this as like, let's kind of ease into more stricter restrictions on our STRs in Mammoth, and, kind of taking baby steps into harsher guidelines. But these 2 council members felt really strongly that those recommendations needed to be included. And so town staff is going to look into that and bring it back to town council. Unfortunately, we really don't have more information than that, because those were not, the committee spent weeks going into these other proposals, kind of spelling them out, what it might mean. And, those weren't suggestions that the committee had.
Yeah, and just to kind of give you a picture of how it was in that room, by this hour, people were kind of pulling their hair and rubbing their eyes, and it was pretty frustrating for many people. On one end, we had these council members who kind of had their own ideas and their own feelings of what should be recommended, and the other 2 were ready to kind of get moving, because they kind of have a heart for both sides. These 2 council members who are ready to proceed, they were feeling bad for some of these implications, these negative implications that are happening to second homeowners, but they also voted for this moratorium, because they also feel bad for a lot of people who don't have a home. So it was a very interesting night, and it did feel like kind of back to the drawing board, and we'll see. It's going to be interesting when these let's say additional recommendations will be presented. We'll see if they do vote on them. There's been a lot of public comment, and a lot of good public comment as well, very educated responses. And so hopefully they listen and they kind of hear what, the people have to say. And if whatever side you're on, it's important that you do voice your opinion. So we do have a kind of a equal balance there, and we can hear all sides. So whether you're for or against it, somewhere in between, it's important you share your ideas. And now, where do we go from here?
That's a good question. I think everyone's wondering. The next town council meeting is February 21st, 2024 at 4 p.m. And our understanding is certified properties will come back for a vote to the town council to, start implementing that. And then I believe all of the other recommendations are still coming back again for the committee to properly advise on, in addition to the caps and a 1-year wait. After that, I don't think we really know, where it goes from there. It does seem like some of the town council members do want to see the moratorium end in May when it's set to expire. But after the last meeting, it sort of seems like maybe these other members don't really care if it ends in May or if it goes longer. Right.
Yeah. It seems like there has been a bit of a push to get it over sooner rather than later. We'll see. One of Mayor Pro Tem Chris Bubsler did say that this is going to take a long time. It might take forever, is what she said. It was one of her last things she said about this. And housing is a forever topic. So we'll continue to keep you updated on here. And quick disclosure, the best source of information will be the town of Mammoth Lakes. A lot of this is coming from our memory and from our experiences. And, we don't have everything perfectly dialed in. But always fact check, go with the town, attend these meetings. Everything's recorded. It's all online. So there you go. Hope this was educational for you. Hope you learned something. And we'll continue to keep you in the loop. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you.